All right, so let's pick back up right where we left off last time, where we kind of didn't finish. So this will be the second part of the videos on Chapter 18, talking about developing the city, the modern American city. Um, Basically, it's the same, a lot of the same stuff conceptually as the stuff we got in Chapter 17, but it's just kind of broken into two separate chapters rather than combined into one really, really large one. So, now if you remember, we didn't finish this last slide, so we'll get into this a little bit here, and this deals with kind of the building of and creation of modern cities in the United States. You can see in the background is a streetcar, a trolley car, which is one of the many different new forms of transportation that were commonplace in America, you know, at the end of the 19th century, as people try new ideas and new things to uh, create and realize the dream of the modern American city. This comes largely through the creation and development of new urban technologies. These two urban technologies that are most dominant um, in this arena are transportation and construction. So we'll talk a little bit about transportation first. You know, early on when you start to get cars, automobiles late in the 19th century, very few people have them. You know, you're talking in the thousands, maybe not even the tens of thousands. Um, but there's other forms of transportation that are making their way into the cities. You have uh, trolley cars like you see here, um, that kind of run on a rail and go around, you know, from place to place in one straight direction or another, and make it easy for people to switch from car to car if they're going north south and they need to go east west. You get off at a point, you get on the next one, similar to how we ride a bus today. And other modes of public transportation as well. You have cable cars in some cities. Some cities actually still have them. Kind of like San Francisco still has their trolley cars, if you've ever been there. Buses start to come around once we get into the 20th century a little bit. And of course, you have America's first subways. Obviously, New York becomes kind of like the most famous city, you know, for a subway and the largest subway system. But it's actually Boston that has a subway system before New York, and kind of pioneers that idea of underground transportation. So, why are they needed in the city? Well, as cities grow larger, people are further and further away from their place of work. Um, Also, as cities grow larger in terms of population, you need organized ways with which to move people around a city in a quick, timely, and orderly fashion. Public transportation comes in to account for that and take care of that issue. So, you know, that proves to be a great benefit to cities, and you know, something that has survived ever since in various forms. Obviously, buses are different now. Trolley cars and cable cars are less common, but you know, we still have our subways and elevated railways in many American cities. Now, the other aspect of the modern city, building the modern city, of course, is the advent of the skyscraper. The skyscrapers are really, really important symbolically and for other reasons in America, right? What are the advantages of building up? Well, for one, if you're building upward instead of outward, you're taking up less space. And you imagine if all the skyscrapers were as long as they were tall, or had to be built out, there would be no room. You know, these cities would be, you know, incredibly large, and there'd be no room for anything else. So building upward not only saves space, you know, because there's plenty of air with which to build upon, but you know, it also saves money in terms of property taxes and things like that too, to a certain degree. Obviously, if you own a skyscraper, your property taxes are going to be higher than if you own a you know, four-story building. But you know, the land up there, in other words, the air up there isn't free. Um, but you know, so that's one great advantage of building up. Uh, you know, there's also other aspects to the skyscraper that are really important too. But we have to examine first, why all of a sudden are we able to build skyscrapers? What makes the skyscrapers practical? Two things. Number one, the invention of the electric, um, and steel reinforced elevator with steel cables that can pull people up many floors. Without these, the skyscraper is not practical. It's not practical to build a 20-story building or even a 10-story building in some cases that doesn't have elevator access because nobody wants to walk up and down all those stairs. But now that we have elevators, suddenly we can build up, and up. The other thing is steel production. As steel production increases, steel becomes cheaper, making it more viable to build these massive steel structures around the country that help build and modernize American cities. And that's the other important point here. The message of the skyscraper is also very important. What does the skyscraper say about America? Just like when you see someone with a large home, you assume they do well. You assume they're successful. Well, in the very same way, those that see the skyscrapers being built in the U.S., the immigrants that come over here and glimpse at New York City for the first time on the boat, see it as a land of opportunity because they see these massive buildings that touch the sky and say that, wow, this is the place to go because it's growing, it's industrial, it's becoming bigger, better, and stronger. Surpassing European cities and stuff like that. Very much in the same way that I think a lot of people look at places like Dubai today as they continue to build more big buildings and stuff, or some cities in China. Wow, they must be really growing at a tremendous rate because of the types and sizes of buildings that are going up there. So something else to consider. All right, so moving on. As great as it is that the cities are becoming what they're becoming, there's certainly some challenges too that are a certain part of urban life. One of these big challenges, of course, is the spread of fire and disease. They didn't build cities, back in the 1800s, with the forethought to think that eventually they're going to become these giant metropolises. In fact, most buildings were no more than 4 stories high, and many of them were made of wood. As that wood gets older, drier, and deteriorates, you have the risk of fire. So if you get a fire in a tenement house, which many tenement houses were built of wood, the next thing you know, you got a whole city block that's been caught on fire. If you think of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, caused by these wooden buildings all over the city that caught fire. Another big problem that you have in these urban areas are disease. Disease is a major problem in urban cities, and it's something that has to be dealt with and managed. But unfortunately, you don't have the ability to do that so quickly. I think we realize now, with the coronavirus and everything, how quickly disease can spread, and efforts that need to be taken to prevent the spread of these different diseases. And with more and more people packed into small spaces in a lot of these cities, obviously illness, disease, flu, other things are going to spread really quickly around the new urban landscape. Another problem that doesn't help is most of these cities, again, aren't equipped to handle the growing populations that they have. So they have very poor sewer systems. Their sanitation departments are also inadequate. Late 1800s and early 20th centuries, this convergence of new technology and old, and it's the same with transportation. While you have rail cars and things like that, and some bikes, and you're starting to have some automobiles. One thing you still have a ton of in the city, which is still a popular mode of transportation for people, aside from walking, are horses. And horses poop all over the ground. So with more and more people, you have more horses, you have more manure and other garbage and stuff to clean up, which is a natural thing that happens in the big city. But without a sewer system that can sustain it, and without a sanitation department that can handle it adequately, you have to, you're going to have a tough time dealing with that. Cities like New York institute newer and stricter and more organized forms of sanitation to make their cities cleaner and safer over time. But, not before the problems that come with illness and disease and other problems make their way through a lot of these big cities. The other big problem that you have to deal with in urban areas is, of course, poverty, crime, and violence. Now, it's one thing leads to another, right? The desperation of poverty often leads people to a life of crime and violence. Okay, oftentimes these are immigrants who came chasing the American dream and found themselves to be unsuccessful. With a family to take care of or themselves to take care of, they're lured into the possibility of easy money through becoming part of the mob or part of a gang or something like that. As more and more Italian immigrants come in and folks from other countries, we start to see the mobs grow and gangs grow more in these cities, full of young people that wanted to make it big, but fell a little short and turned to a life of crime. Poverty is nothing new in America. Rural poverty is something that's always existed. Subsistence farmers, former slaves, all those people, are poor and impoverished. But now urban poverty is something different. There's a lot more people in smaller spaces, people dealing with the same circumstances. They band together, they form gangs or whatever, and turn to lives of crime and violence in some cases. So, with growing crime rates, that is happening all over big American cities, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Chicago, all of them. We have to do something to address the growing crime rates in the cities. So a response to that is something called what they refer to as the Rogues Gallery. In larger terms, in larger terms than this, it's really the birth of modern American law enforcement. Basically, the Rogues Gallery is a collection of criminals that have been photographed, or you have like caricatures or something of their picture, which make the public aware of these people and their crimes. We also get through this new approach to law enforcement, the birth of investigative law enforcement, detective work, and stuff of that nature. Criminal profiling, right? This criminal is, known to be around these areas. He's a pickpocket. He robs people. He does whatever. Making the public aware of these type of crimes, as well as getting, a profiling system in place to better allow law enforcement to kind of predict, handle, and prevent crimes, that are committed by these different types of criminals. Okay, this is modern law enforcement. This is what they do today. In wake of what happened in the Capitol riots in 2021 here. You have, the FBI probably goes hard to work at, trying to identify, who are the people involved with that, getting background information on their level of involvement and what had they done in the past, etc. It's all part of this whole system that really popularized itself in big American cities like New York through the Rogues Gallery late in the 1800s. Okay, so you probably can't see that. Switching a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about a popular book from this era called Sister Carrie. Okay, so Sister Carrie was, is this cautionary tale. It's a tale about a small town girl and how she wanted to come to the city and pursue her dream of becoming a dancer. And she goes from Iowa to Chicago. She meets a guy. She's with him for a while. She meets another guy. He promises her more. They make their way to New York while she has opportunity and her career starts to take off as a dancer and a performer on Broadway. His life kind of falls apart and he ends up taking his own life. The end of the book and the moral of the story is Carrie kind of acquires the fame and fortune that she desires, but in it, she doesn't find the fulfillment that she thinks she will. She's unhappy. She feels alone. And it's a book really that warns us of the trappings of fame and the trappings of big city life and the problems that can emerge from that. Okay. The other big thing to talk about here is machine politics, okay, or the boss political system. In big cities, you had what were called political machines that would control politics in the cities. The person in charge of the machine was always referred to as a boss. These people would largely take advantage of immigrants would take advantage of immigrants to make sure that their candidates stayed in political office. They would do this in a variety of ways, through paying people money for votes, through printing ballots with only their candidates on them, through promising people jobs for votes, and largely through intimidation. Now you may ask, like, okay, how is it that intimidation? How do they do that? Back then we didn't have the secret ballot system. Okay, back then people would often go to a polling place and they'd have to announce who they supported. You know, how many hands up for Smith, how many hands up for Jones. Well, these cronies, you know, guys that are part of the political machine will, they'll hang out there with their billy clubs or whatever and, intimidate people into making sure they vote for their guy. So you can't simply just say, yeah, I voted for your guy when you really didn't. And it gave a tremendous amount of power to these political bosses and a tremendous amount of power to these city functions and governments as well. The most notorious boss was a guy by the name of Boss Tweed, William Marcy Tweed. He was the leader of the New York political machine known as Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall became very corrupt. In fact, before he was caught, I believe Boss Tweed stole as much as $200 million from the city of New York. He eventually gets caught and busted for everything, but it's the most significant example of how the corruption and graft, as they call it, that existed in the big city came to dominate the political systems here. Okay, we're going to find out in chapter 20, just like we find out about the future of labor unions a little bit, because we left that stuff kind of open-ended. In chapter 20, we'll find out what kind of happens with these people and how city governments, state, local, and even federal governments to an extent, work to move beyond this corrupt boss system into a more modern, less corrupt political system. All right. So switching gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit about mass consumption. We live today in a consumer society, a society that's all about having goods and things, both the things we need and the things we want. This is a new concept as we go towards the end of the 19th century. As we see new patterns of income and consumption kind of emerge on the country, and in big cities in particular, people, of course, now have the opportunity to acquire more and have more things, right? So by the end of the 19th century, people are making more money than ever before. This is average people. You've got your super rich folks, and then you've got your poor folks that don't have all that much. And then you've got the middle class people and the working class people who aren't doing nearly as well as comparable people would be today, but still better than we'd ever seen in the past. Okay? So by the end of the 19th century, people are making more money than ever before. This in turn leads to a rise in what we call the service industry. Service industry is anything that provides goods and services to customers. Restaurants, clothing stores, even taxi rides and haircuts and stuff like that. The service industry explodes in America in this latter part of the 19th century. Okay, so what this does is it provides untold numbers of jobs to immigrants and poor people. What else is unique about this new pattern of consumption is that for the first time in our country's history, we see a lot of it directed towards women. Okay, women as consumers, as well as women as employees, women as workers in these department stores, as well as women they're going to the city and going to the stores to buy clothes and stuff like that. A family weekend would include maybe dad and son go to the ball game and mom and daughter go to the department store, go to the Macy's, go to the JCPenney, the Montgomery Ward, and try on clothes, get new clothes. This is all part of the service industry, and this is a brand new concept to America during this time. So, what are examples of these mass consumption places and service industry things that are still around today to a certain degree? Okay, for one, we have ready-made clothing. This is a brand new concept. Ready-made clothing means that you can go to a store and buy a dress that's already, been made. Where for generations beforehand, all clothes were made largely by, your mom made the clothes and you wore them. This ultimately gives rise to yet another new industry, the fashion industry to a certain degree, which is of course going to be largely influenced by women. Um, so you have the emergence of fashion as an industry, because now for the first time you have styles of clothes that are being bought by multiple people. You see somebody famous or popular wearing a certain type of outfit, everybody wants that outfit for themselves. So yet another industry emerges out of this concept of ready-made clothing, and that's fashion. We see the emergence of chain stores. Grocery stores like Kroger start to emerge, um, and small beginnings, but they're grocery stores, furthering even less the need for people to act as subsistence farmers, uh, when you can get the food and stuff you need at a cheap price at a grocery store, and have a more consistent income in a factory. You have stores like Woolworths. Uh, this Woolworths is what was known as a five and dime store. Basically, you get a lot of things you need for the home. Basically, all kinds of different stuff. It's like a Walmart or a Myers without the food. You can't really get food there, but you can get all kinds of different goods and things you need at like a Woolworth. I guess it's kind of like a Kohl's or something like that. You have mail order houses. Now we have mail order houses today. Basically, it's anything you buy online. But the pioneers of mail order houses were Sears. And Sears Roebuck and others used to come out with these catalogs, and they would be sent to people all over the country. In rural areas, you could get a catalog, order things, and just like we would on Amazon today, these things get sent out to you, making these people in rural areas feel like they have some connection to the big city where more and more of our population is living. You also see the emergence of department stores. Like seen here is a picture of a Montgomery Ward store, J.C. Penney, Macy's, places like that. All in the big cities. People go to the city. They have the opportunity to try on different clothes, see different things, different styles and stuff like that. These become dominant and popular and help lead to, halfway through the 20th century in the 1950s and 60s, the emergence of malls and the mall culture that we have today that's slowly but surely kind of dying out a little bit. Um, a lot of these popular stores obviously today are closing down, brick and mortar stores as we call them, and that's largely happening, ironically enough, because Amazon or the modern mail order house is making it so much easier for people to do purchases and things like that online. So that's what you have with that. So a little bit more, and then we'll be done here for today. Consumer society and leisure. Okay, so um, the concept of leisure was an interesting one to American people all throughout our history, right? From the 1700s and the 1800s, the concept of leisure basically meant Sundays off from work, and going to church with the family and focusing on family things, right? So prior to the late 19th century, concept of leisure was really much more about going to church on Sunday and setting time aside for the Sabbath. This was largely because there wasn't much else to do. You worked all week, you worked Monday through Saturday or whatever, and you have Sunday to rest and get ready for the week to come. But as we head into the 20th century, people have more money. Transportation enables them to pursue, newer and different opportunities that he describes as leisure or pleasurable experiences. Like I mentioned before, a family leisure experience can be, the family goes into the town on a weekend, and the boy and the boy and his father go to a ball game, and the girls go to shopping or whatever that might be. That would be a leisure activity. Simon Patton, who is kind of like a psychologist, I guess, in some sense, felt that people really undervalued leisure in our society and overvalued work. People that overwork and don't get enough time for relaxation and leisure, can lead to stress and anxiety and health problems. Patton believes that with a little bit of rest or leisure or enjoyable experiences, people's work efficiency will improve, their attitude will improve, their family structure in life will improve. So people should start seeking out new and different opportunities for leisure type activities. This could be, playing in some sort of sporting activity. This could be, like I said, going to a game in town. This could be other things such as, getting away for a weekend and going out to the country, or amusement parks are starting to emerge around this time. So you take your family to an amusement park. All of these things are various forms of leisure, and as Patton believes, and more people are believing, good for individuals' personal mental health and family health, and even their professional and work efficiency as well, which leads to yet the emergence of another industry in this country, which is the travel industry. If people are going to travel away from home on weekends, you need ways for them to do that. So trains are populated. More and more people buy cars, so that's necessary for roads. You need destinations for people to go to, so you build, amusement parks or other things, or other attractions around, a beach or something of that nature. And of course, you need to build hotels in places so they can house these people as they come into these cities. So what are some of the different forms of leisure that people enjoy during this time? One of the big growing forms of leisure that people start to enjoy are spectator sports. Chief among spectator sports are the big three at the time, which are baseball, boxing, and horse racing. I don't have horse racing written down there. But baseball and boxing are by far the two most popular sports. Baseball games, pack 50,000 people into a stadium. Boxing matches can do the same. Imagine being all the way up in the nosebleed seats, watching two guys that look like ants box for round after round. But boxing was really popular. Obviously the most famous baseball name of this era, of the early part of the 20th century, is Babe Ruth. But boxing had boxers like Jack Dempsey, who were, almost as popular as Babe Ruth, and were, really significant cultural figures as well. And then you got horse racing. So you put horse racing and boxing together, you also have yet another industry that is going to grow in this country tremendously in the 20th century: gambling. You have the emergence of a little bit of football. Football was kind of an interesting sport back then. Okay, they didn't pass much. It was all pretty much running, very similar to rugby. And a lot of people condemn football because of its violence. That was a very violent game, and that hurt its popularity early on. But it was very popular at the college level. The NFL wouldn't really start operations until 1920. So during the 19 teens, that and before that, college football is really dominant as the dominant football activity for people, even though it's a sport that is really condemned by a lot of people, and is nowhere near yet and popular at the level of like boxing and baseball here. So other forms of leisure, people enjoy some of the things that they had in the past, like theater. People enjoy the theater. Music, different styles of music are starting to make their way into this country, as you kind of take immigrant kids and immigrants from different countries. They come together and the melting pot churns out new and different forms of music that are popular amongst different groups of people. And then finally you have vaudeville. Vaudeville is an interesting thing. It's kind of like a watered down version of a circus. In vaudeville, people would go to these places where you'd see lots of different kind of shows and acts and attractions and things. One thing that stood the test of time from vaudeville is this is where actual stand-up comedy kind of got its start. Stand-up comedians such as Bob Hope and George Burns and Milton Berle, people you've probably never heard of, got their start on vaudeville. So comedy, stand-up comedy and comedy in general to a certain degree owes its beginnings to vaudeville. Then on the other side of that, in vaudeville, you could see like oddities and freak shows and stuff were popular. You'd have like, a sword swallower or a fire eater, or, sadly they would have people with like deformities, or midgets or something like that, people that had some, that people would go see in these vaudeville shows. So lots of different weird and different types of things that people would enjoy, um, at these kind of leisure type activity places. And then finally, by about 1915, we see the first silent films come out. Now, the first ever, what's credited as the first movie in American history, comes out in 1902. It's called The Great Train Robbery. Now, there was no real sound, and it was very short. There was no sound, but it was just some kind of moving images of people making up this robbing of a train. But by 1915, we get our first silent films that have music and have a more cohesive story, but they lack dialogue. And the first notable film to come out in America in 1915 was Birth of a Nation. Now, Birth of a Nation is generally a pretty bad film in terms of its message. It's a story about how African Americans took over the South after Reconstruction and are ruining the South and hurting everybody in the South. And they call upon the Ku Klux Klan to kind of save America, save the South from these, black miscreants or whatever you want to call them. So it's a really negative story, but it's very significant historically because it gives birth to the film industry, which is, again, yet another industry that is going to grow tremendously throughout the 20th century. So one thing we're seeing here and all the stuff we talked about today is how much massive growth we're seeing happen in different industries spouting up all over, helping form and take shape the modern America that we live in today. All right, that's all for this one. That one was super long. And, yeah, we'll see you later.